and programming highlights on our YouTube channel, C-SPAN and social media. Connect today. A discussion now on the role social media has played in the Arab political uprisings in the Middle East, and how media such as Facebook and Twitter can be used as political organizing tools here in the U.S. Speakers include Jillian C, a writer and human rights activist with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and comedian and blogger Dean Obeidallah. This forum was part of the national convention of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee in Washington. It's about an hour.
Test. Oh, it's working.
Okay. Everybody, we have limited time, so we'd like to get the panel started. Please have a seat. Please have a seat, everybody. Before we start, I want to get a quick show of hands. How many people here have a Twitter account that they use? Okay.
Oh, not bad.
We're trying to get the hashtag going, hashtag ADCConv, C-O-N-V. So please use that if you want to comment on this, have a discussion sort of on Twitter as we speak. So it's not necessary for you to turn off your cell phones. We encourage you to be using your cell phones during this panel. How many people here have a Facebook account that they use? Yeah, Mom, you have a Facebook account. I thought you did. Okay, my fault. I'm thinking of my other mom. We were waiting for. We have a little PowerPoint thing to come up here. I don't know if it's going to be coming up, but it was an essential part of our discussion, which is about social networking in media. And before I really get started with that, I wanted to introduce the speakers today. On my left is Dean Obeidallah. He's an Arab American comedian. You might have seen him on CNN. Sometimes he writes for CNN's website. He's also the founder of the New York Arab American Comedy Festival, which I understand is in the 8th season. So
yes, in September.
It's in September, so come out to see some good stuff. And then on my right here is Jillian C, who's with the They're very generous, you know. With the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I always want to say Federation.
Yes.
Yeah, it sounds more evil. She's also a very prolific blogger, has an incredible Twitter account, and is really on the cutting edge of questions of the rights of social media users and online activism around the world. So we're going to have two very interesting perspectives today. So we wanted to actually start with kind of referencing the thing that a lot of people have been talking about, which is what happened with Malik Jandali's performance. And we know that it's been brought up in other panels, and that Khalid Matawa, the poet, read the lyrics last night. And so a lot of people are talking about it. But we also felt that that episode had very specific relevance to the idea of social networking, to the use of social networking, because we want to remind you that an online newspaper, Politico, is actually what kind of broke the story about what happened. And you know, the different, Malik Jandali was using Twitter, for example, to tell his side of the story, but it circulated through email. We heard about it through email, Facebook, and Twitter before the event started. And ADC, you know, I think it had to send out its press statement to try to respond to this. But this showed, I think, the power of social media to really get these kind of stories out there, to bring issues to the public's eye that might not have been brought before. And I think the challenge for us is to take this episode and build on it and think about what we want ADC to turn into. I think social media is related to this in that we can think about how social media works and apply some of the lessons to kind of ADC's development and ADC's future. And I want to give a big idea that drives home this point, and then we're going to share with you kind of four main ideas that have to do with social networking that will structure our discussion around those. So the kind of idea I wanted to throw at you, the first big idea I wanted to throw at you is that in social networking, how everybody's connected to everybody else through Facebook and Twitter and that kind of thing, there's this leveling effect in terms of how information flows. I can become a broadcaster. Whereas in the old days, major organizations like ADC were sort of the broadcaster through mailings, through phone trees and that kind of thing, and the Washington Post was a gatekeeper of information. In the new media era, we're all kind of gatekeepers, and we're all circulating information and ideas. So this is a new media kind of logic, and this is what I think drove, in some ways, us finding out about Malik Jandali's story. The old media logic is about preventing certain ideas from getting out, And unfortunately, I think that ADC's response so far has reflected an old media way of thinking. So this is linked to the nature of information flows. ADC so far was built in an era of top-down institutions, whereas social media and the way of information communication technologies is all about networks. And I just wanted to present this idea that there's a major fundamental generational difference that's at play, and that's what's kind of coming out in the Malik Jandali thing. And it's our job, I think, to help ADC move into the right direction, which I think is the information way of the future. I know that all three of us received a lot of messages from people who were very concerned about what happened with Malik Jandali. And so I wanted to give the opportunity to the panelists before we really get started to sort of share their thoughts on it, and also as a way to communicate the message to those people who decided not to come today or pressured us to. So Dean, did you want to start out?
Sure. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me on this panel. I did receive a lot of emails, and this really is a social media issue, because it's from Twitter and Facebook that I learned about Malik Jandali. Then in the press, you get a lot of press coverage. I think it actually raised awareness of him, and on some level, I hope ADC disinvites me next year so I can get more press. It's part of my dream. But on a serious level, it really was distressing for people in our community. And I heard about it through the younger generation. It really was through Twitter and Facebook. It's the way people in the younger generation, and it's not just about age anymore, I should just say the techno generation, are communicating with each other. To me, from a personal point of view, I'm a comedian. Freedom of expression is paramount importance. It's something I defend absolutely. If there's a song about freedom that makes people uncomfortable, you don't disinvite the person who's singing about freedom, you disinvite those who are uncomfortable with the idea of freedom for people in Arab countries or in Syria. That's the issue to me. At the end of the day, though, being here is more important than boycotting. ADC is a friend, and I'm here to engage and speak for my friends who didn't come, who I try to convince to come and say, let's speak to our friends at ADC and try to change things for the better. I know they're listening. I know things are evolving during the day, in fact, and I know there's discussions behind the scenes. So they are listening. So let's, I like the idea of being here, working together with ADC in the future to ensure those issues don't happen, so that the younger techno generation will engage. They're going to be here. They're going to follow ADC, and they're going to be the lifeblood for the future. And we need to think about the future of this organization.
Thanks.
Well, and I guess, for me, from my position as an outsider to this community, I was receiving a lot of messages. I've been rather outspoken about Syria in the sense that of social media. There's been a lot of online repression happening in the country. And so I've been very outspoken on that, and I've gotten a lot of messages to ask me to boycott. And as a sort of free speech absolutist, I think we all sort of agree on that concept. After speaking with my colleagues on the panel, I kind of came to the conclusion that, as I believe that the answer to speech is more speech, I felt that coming here and talking about this would be a better way to address the situation, and even as an outsider to the community. And so that's why I decided to come anyway.
Well, thank you. And during the question and answer period, we'll certainly like to hear if anyone else has viewpoints. But so now we wanted to shift back to the focus on social networking media and sort of what are the attributes of it and what are the risks of it that are important for us to think about. We wanted to structure the conversation around 4 main ideas, and I'll be announcing those ideas in sequence and then inviting Jillian and Dean to share their thoughts on it. So the first idea that I wanted to propose is the idea of broadcasting, which I mentioned earlier. Unlike phones, letters, audio tapes, these sort of old communication tools, social media allows us to communicate with many other people simultaneously. We're able, therefore, to broadcast our ideas to a wider group of people at once. So that's the main kind of first point that I wanted you to be able to take away from this. Jillian, my first question is for you, and it's about the Arab uprisings, which you paid close attention to. There's been a lot of talk about Egypt, for example, being a Facebook or a Twitter revolution. Is that really the case? Can we really say these are Facebook revolutions?
Well, so, I think that attributing credit to these platforms is sort of ignoring the broader point that it takes human power to make anything happen. And so I don't think it's fair to say Facebook or Twitter revolution. But at the same time, to the point of broadcasting, I think that that's where these tools were really effective, because what you saw was people using these tools, pushing information out, witnessing, using video and photographs and images, and really sort of projecting that out of the country. And then you also saw this sort of triangulation with traditional media. So you had like Al Jazeera picking up from social media and then broadcasting back in through satellite television. And I think that this was particularly important in Tunisia. And so you've kind of got this really interesting facet to social media that maybe it's not as effective for organizing. I mean, there's sort of, I think the jury's still out on the organizing question. But in terms of broadcasting, I think that most of the people I've spoken to over the past few weeks, from Egypt, from Tunisia, and from elsewhere, really sort of agree that this idea of witnessing and broadcasting and getting the attention from traditional media through social media really matters.
Yeah. It's such a stark difference from the era of state broadcasting. Before really the spread of the internet, and actually before satellite television, it was the government that had the broadcasting power within a society. Dean, you mentioned earlier that there was actually a precursor to the Arab revolutions. It was the comedy uprisings, I think you called it.
It's the comedy revolution, yes, the comedy spring. Before the Arab Spring, and before this whole use of Facebook and Twitter that everybody saw, I saw it used 2 or 3 years earlier when stand-up comedy first started to flourish in the Middle East. About 3 years ago, the first shows were there, and I was fortunate to be one of the first comedians to go over and do shows. There was not really traditional advertising for this form of entertainment. It was all through Facebook. And in Egypt, we had almost 4,000 people come out to a show, and it was almost all advertised through Facebook. Lebanon, 3,000 people. Jordan, through the Youmans Stand-Up Comedy Festival, I'm involved in producing there. We use Facebook and Twitter a great deal. Facebook especially, now Twitter secondary. Saudi Arabia, through the whole region. It was used to organize a whole younger generation of Arabs in the Middle East, not talking about politics, not talking about reform, but just the idea of getting them together to talk about this was comedy. And now the young people are using it to expand their comedy horizon. They're communicating with each other. There's a lot of young Arabs doing comedy. And it touched on something else too. I mean, I just want to say the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring, to me, is not geographic any longer. The Arab Spring's here as well in America. We're using it here to empower each other. So, and it goes to the ADC issue with the performer as well. I mean, the Arab Spring is a different mentality now. The world's changing. So it was amazing to see the young people there use it, selfishly to sell tickets on some level, but now more importantly, the young Arabs are doing stand-up on their own. It's no longer a Western import. And they're using Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to get their message out, to organize each other, to produce their own shows without us, which I think is actually better. Yeah. It's more organic now in the Arab world, stand-up comedy.
So you're not afraid of being overthrown?
I have so little power. Nobody wants my power,
That's what Mubarak said.
It's these comedy thugs who want me out, apparently, infiltrators.
So the idea of broadcasting, reaching many people, that was the first sort of takeaway point. The second point we want to talk about is campaigning or coordinating. So social action, using social media to bring together different people, to recruit, to organize, to coordinate people to work towards the same kind of goal. What are some of the affordances or features of social media, Jillian, that facilitate coordination? And do you have any kind of examples of success stories?
Yeah, well, so there was a really interesting story a few months ago when, right at the very beginning, like January 27th, when things had started in Egypt, the Atlantic, I think, had published this pamphlet that had been passed out on the streets in Tahrir and elsewhere. And it was sort of this, how to deal with tear gas and how to handle this issue, et cetera. And at the same time, simultaneously, there was a Google document that contained virtually the same information. And I logged in at one point, and there were 12,000 people looking at this Google document, and some of them were updating it in real time. And so you've got this kind of different, you can take a paper pamphlet and you can print it up. I don't know how much printing costs in Egypt, but you can print it and you can hand it out to people and try to make sure that it doesn't get into the hands of the wrong people. Or you can use this online tool, get it out to thousands of people, and then update it as things change. And so you've kind of got this fascinating means of being able to organize in real time and to be able to change as the flow changes on the ground.
Are there any other specific examples maybe from the United States?
Yeah. Well, so I get asked this a lot. A lot of people say, okay, so why doesn't this work in the US? And I think there's a lot of different reasons. But one of the things that I've found fascinating, I think one of the most prominent ways that social media is used to organize is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign. And I mean, I think you can speak to that just as well as I can, or probably better than I can. But if that's something that's really embraced social media, embraced Twitter, embraced Facebook. I mean, when a celebrity says that they're going to perform in Israel, you have this glomming onto that person's Facebook page. You see 12,000 messages to a celebrity, from both sides of the argument, or from all sides of the argument, really. But I think that's a really fascinating use of how people manage to come together around this core issue.
And I know there will be a panel tomorrow, I think, about BDS.
Yeah, so I don't go too far into it. But.
Yeah. Dean, now in your experience of setting up events and being kind of an organizer of events with the festival, but also a performer at events, are there kind of attributes of social media that help with setting up these events?
Without social media, we can never have the budget we need to reach out to people to advertise for the events. The New York Arab American Comedy Festival is not for profit. We have a very limited budget. The Youmans Stand-Up Comedy Festival has a limited budget, and it's also a not-for-profit festival in Jordan. Using social media is a great way for anyone to promote any kind of activism idea. I mean, I view comedy as a form of activism on a certain level. So to get the message out there, and I think in our next section we're going to talk about something specific, but getting your message out. I mean, if you have a business, there's nothing wrong for profit. If you have a for-profit business to use Facebook or Twitter, it's a great way, but using it the right way, and I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later, the effective ways of using it. But it's changed the world. Before it was about send postcards, it has spent a lot of money, put an ad in the New York Times, we really couldn't afford it, but we had to struggle to do it. Now we have a Facebook group, you have Twitter followers, and you get the word out, it's effective, it's one-to-one, people get it in their email box if it's a Facebook group. And it's direct advertising for pennies. It's just about working. It's physical activity. So I think it's very, very useful. And it really helped. The reason stand-up comedy got known in the Middle East is because of YouTube. It brought comics from America to people's homes in the Arab world whenever they wanted by simply clicking on a YouTube link and finding out about us, the comedians. We're Arab American first, and now more broadly, other comedians. So it's been a great way of bridging the world. And I really think social media and YouTube deserve recognition for that. They're doing bridging the world in a way that you can never hope for. They can never dream of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think my friends in Tunisia send me more lolcats than anyone else does.
So more LOL cats?
LOL cats,
Can you explain that?
You all know LOL cats? No. Oh, okay. Oh, this is a good
You
one.
will LOL after you hear this.
So it's like someone takes a photograph of a cat, any kind of cat, and they put a caption under it that's funny. And these cats have their own special language. I know this sounds crazy, but this is really widespread. But it's all in English originally, but now you're seeing some people doing them in French, which is kind of, this is really caught on globally. And I get sent these from friends. My mom sends them to me, but so do my friends in other countries. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. I think it's also important to remember that as much as social media was important in revolutions, it's also important for just like time-wasting activities and entertainment.
Very much so.
But I think Dean's point about the cheapening of information is really key, because we know the saying money is power, but the ability to communicate with many people for pennies really has a leveling effect in terms of former kind of power disparities, and that's what we saw really with the Arab Spring. So I'm glad you made that point. Moving on to the third point. The second point was about social action, about using social media to coordinate activities across distances even. The third point is about social media being a tool that can be used well or be used poorly. So I'm hoping that for those of you who use Twitter and Facebook, you might pick up some tips here from people who are very well versed in using them, or maybe in the question and answer period have your own, or also use your own Twitter account or Facebook to post your own sort of tips. But my question for you, both as social media users, broadcasters, and receivers, what are some of the effective and ineffective ways of using social media? Jillian, starting with you.
Well, I mean, I'd like to talk a little bit to the point of news organizations using it, because you've got, so the New York Times has long had a Twitter feed. They jumped onto that very quickly. But up until very recently, it was just a broadcast-only feed. They were linking to their articles. They were, basically only putting out, not taking anything back in. And lately, they've started to use it as more of a back-and-forth communication tool. And I think that that's really important. I'd like to bring up the example of Andy Carvin from NPR. Now, say what you will about his actual feed, but what he's been doing is following people in the Middle East and North Africa, and actually using them as sources to report directly on Twitter about what's happening on the ground. And so in Libya, he'll be communicating with people on Twitter, kind of pushing out what they're saying, and then that often gets used by journalists. And so it becomes a really fascinating tool for journalists and news organizations to have not necessarily a primary source. I don't think that we can completely rely on online sources, and I know we're going to talk about that in a minute, but as sort of a secondary complementary source. And I think we saw that a lot with Tahrir as well. You saw, Al Jazeera and CNN and everyone, they all had people on the ground reporting and using their cameras and saying this is what's happening, but then you also had a local context, a local flavor from people on Twitter. And so I followed the Egyptian revolution on Twitter. I really did. I had friends in the country, friends who were on the ground, and I looked at what they were saying, and then I also looked at who they were talking to know who else I could trust, and I think that that's really important.
Yeah, and I think the term that's being used for that is curation, and that's actually, it's like the idea of rebroadcasting, actually. Curation comes from the art world. There's usually an organizer of an art show who picks the best works of arts, picks them along a theme, and sort of becomes a mini also gatekeeper for information or for art. And Andy Carvin is a great example of someone who's curating information from social media and becoming a credible source of redistribution of information.
And you've also got, if I may, you've also got Global Voices, which globalvoicesonline.org, they've been doing this for years, where they follow all over the world. It's not region specific. They follow blogs and they report on what bloggers are saying. And so it's just another picture. It's complementary to traditional media, I think.
That's right. Now, Dean, I wanted to ask you also about a Twitter account you recently set up called Comedians for Sarah Palin. It's also on Facebook, I understand, but the handle is at Comics for Palin. Now, that's using social media as a political tool. What are you doing with this tool, and why do you think it'll be effective?
First of all, Sarah Palin's the best thing for comedians since George Bush, so we want her to win. And that's why I started Comedians for Sarah Palin. So it's tongue-in-cheek, but it's really an example of what anybody else can do. I write more frequently for CNN.com, so I wrote an article, Comedians for Palin, and I started a Comics for Palin Twitter account. And it's been up for like 5 or 6 days, and we have about 600 people following us now on that, and I keep adding comedians as well. And anytime someone tweets a joke, which means if you don't follow Twitter, they basically say a joke in the cyberspace world on Twitter about Sarah Palin. If I can find it, I will retweet it on our account so people can read it, and then others will follow us in turn on that. But I think it's a great grassroots way. I was lucky enough to get on CNN to talk about it because I have a relationship with them. But other media outlets, in a way, have contacted me and they're like, what's this about and what are you doing? You can start anything. You can start a Twitter account, just you for whatever it is, whatever group it is. You're for something with Palestinians, or something for American, something with democracy, something about a candidate. The beauty is you just set it up in 5 minutes and it's there. And then you start trying to get people to follow you, your friends, either through Facebook or Twitter, to follow what you're doing. But I think it's the greatest time for empowerment. It's the most democratized time ever that I know of in my life, where anyone can sit in your room, for good or for bad, and create a website or actually a Twitter thing or a Facebook thing for minutes for free, and start getting the word out and raising consciousness about an issue. It's a time to take action. If there's ever a time to take action easily, this is the time. It couldn't be easier right now. Mm-hmm. It's dangerous too, but it's potentially great at the same time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Were there any other tips or anything that you wanted to add in terms of what are the top two things that a Twitter or Facebook user can do to be more visible and to generate more followers?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the important things about this is that, yes, you can use it for self-promotion, and I think that we all do that, right? Like anytime I write an article, I post it out to my followers because I want them to see it. But I think at the same time, you have to engage with people. You absolutely have to connect with people. And I think, honestly, one of the best ways to make friends in the world and to network is to give other people props and give other people kudos. So if you're doing that on Twitter, you're bound to get more followers. I would say that's my big one.
Okay. Do you have a big one?
If you really want to get more people to either be your friends on Facebook or followers on Twitter, it's really engaging. It can't be one way. It can't be you just tweeting things out or posting things on Facebook and sitting back. It's engaging with people if they make a comment on your wall on Facebook about an issue that you've posted or about a video that you've posted, to respond to them. Because in turn, that gets people to feel like you're having a conversation. And then in turn, they usually will then repost the article or the comments on their own Facebook wall or on their own Twitter account. Yeah. So it's not one way. It really has to be, it's a cyber conversation you're having with many, many people at the same time. The more engaged you are, the more people will want to speak to you, because they know there's someone there. You're not a machine. You're not a robot just posting things.
Yeah.
And for good and bad. I get negative comments and I respond and sometimes try to make sense of it. and positive ones, or just a dialogue, just a discussion about an issue.
Yeah. And I also want to add, I think it's very important to establish credibility and transparency. See, the thing about the new media age is that when you say something publicly, someone can very easily go find out a different perspective and bring it up against you, where you wouldn't have this problem so quickly in the old media age. So it's very important that if you make a mistake, to correct yourself and be very honest about the mistakes you made. It's so much harder to get away with sort of spin. And transparency is WikiLeaks, I think, really shows, is the sort of way of the future, as long as we can preserve the integrity of access to the internet.
The world's changed so much. If someone says something to your face you don't believe, you just get your phone out and look it up right in front of them right now. Yeah. Like, how much is that? The world used to go back, you have to go home and look it up or go to a library. Yeah. Everything's instantaneous. So take advantage of it. I mean, use it for business or for not-for-profit, for activism, but it's out there and it's free and it's generally fun. It's just a little bit of man hours or work hours of doing it.
Yeah. So that was a quick kind of overview of social media as tools to be used optimally or incorrectly. But so you don't get the impression that we think that it's going to fix all our problems, this great utopia known as social media. We also wanted to point out that there are downsides to it. There are pitfalls of social media. So let's talk about some of those. Dean, can you think of any current news?
Nothing comes to mind. Nothing with a politician from New York. I can't even think of anything. Yeah. Sending pictures. Obviously, even if you know how to use social media, with the Anthony Weiner scandal, a man who's very, very skilled in using it apparently made one little mistake. He simply, instead of sending a direct message of the picture he wanted to send to the young lady, he sent it as a public picture for anyone else could see it who was following him on Twitter. That one little thing, instead of putting direct message as opposed to sending it out, is bringing down his career. I mean, he may actually.
What was the picture of?
I don't remember. But I think his last name might be a clue.
I think it was his last name, yeah.
That's what it was. It was just his last name. The point is, don't do that. And you're going to send pictures of yourself, send it by email. Okay, folks, right off the bat.
Don't even do that.
But don't do it.
Just don't.
Don't post anything of yourself you don't want people to see. But if you have the sense to do it. But there's, he suffered for that. And others have suffered. They've suffered. Cyber world cuts both ways. The other downside are people make up their own identities, not like identity theft. They make up their own identities to attack you in cyberspace, to write articles about you in cyberspace. And there's no accountability because they don't even exist. No one knows who they really are. And so you have these phantoms that come at you. Just look at the comments, too, on not just stuff I write on CNN. If you look at the op-eds I write on CNN, if it ever deals with Arabs or Muslims, the angry comments are off the charts. They're indefensible. And people could be anonymous and make up a little identity and write whatever they want.
Look at the comments on any YouTube video.
Oh, the YouTube video as well. But there's a lot of hateful people out there who know how to use the internet, unfortunately. So we have to get out there and combat those people as much as possible.
That's a very good point. It cuts both ways, just as much good that can be done, bad can be done. So it's a tool like anything else, I think is the point. But there's this very interesting case that Jillian's been following, and it deals with this question of anonymity, of false personas in the public light. Jillian, do you want to talk about the Amina Araf case? Has anyone heard of Amina Araf? Okay, I think this is a very interesting story that says some of the kind of pitfalls of online.
Yeah, this one it's very bizarre. A few months ago, this blogger who claimed to be in Syria, her name was Amina Araf, she went by Amina Obeidallah, and she called herself a gay girl in Damascus. And she had been blogging about things that were happening in Syria and her life as a lesbian in Syria. And it was very compelling. It seemed like a very true story, and really there might have been a few facts that were off, but nobody said anything about that. And then what happened was about 2 months ago, The Guardian in the UK and I think CBS in the US both reported on her and did interviews with her. And so it lended her this credibility. So we all really believed that this person was real. And on Monday of last week, someone posted to her blog that she had been kidnapped by security forces. So, immediately this story blew up. Everyone was like, oh my God, they're arresting bloggers. And that wouldn't be a first. Syria has arrested bloggers before. But this was kind of this, wow, like this girl is missing. Everybody's panicking. And then they said, oh, well, she has this girlfriend. And oh, so we can talk to this person. Turns out they'd never met. So we go, okay, well, let's look on her Facebook page and find out maybe her cousin. Turns out there is no cousin. So basically, this entire story was fabricated. And at this point, I think the way things stand right now is that they found that she had stolen 150 photographs from a Croatian woman living in London, and that's whose photographs she was using. And so at this point, we don't know if this girl is real or not. Nobody understands why she would do such a thing. And there's lots of hypotheses. I'm not going to get into that. But what it comes down to is, there was this old New Yorker cartoon years ago that said, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Well, in this case, on the internet, nobody knows that you're what? I mean, she could be American, she could be a man, she could be an infiltrator. Who knows? I mean, really, who knows? And so, there's this kind of issue of trust. And in this case, I think that journalists failed to do their job. If you're going to interview someone, they never spoke to her on the phone. They never met her in person. They just trusted an interview exchange by email. You can't do that as a journalist.
Right. And that the points, I think, in some ways to another dark side issue of social media, which is that it's also can be a tool of surveillance by those in power. For example, I don't know if you read the story in the Wall Street Journal about how the activists were actually able to take Tahrir Square, but essentially they knew that their Facebook conversations were being monitored, so they organized these 20 protests all around Cairo. The 21st was kept off Facebook, and that's where the critical mass started. They basically went into the slums and started grabbing people, and then they built up, and then they went to Tahrir Square. So it was the power of social media, but not in a direct way. They were able to use it as a decoy, essentially, for the government. And then there's also this example from Sudan. Correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, the government set up a fake, Facebook protest in Sudan, in Khartoum, and then they arrested everyone who showed up.
Yeah, they used it as bait to get people to come out. And I mean, you've also got governments using these tools to surveil people. I mean, in Syria, we heard that people were arrested and had their Facebook passwords demanded. And then basically the idea is, okay, you give me your Facebook account, and then I can go find out who all of your contacts are, and then I can go after them. In Morocco a few years ago, there was a young man, Fouad Martara, who was arrested for creating a fake profile of one of the Moroccan princes. Now I can't remember who it was. But he created a profile of this prince, and to this day, nobody knows how the authorities found out that it was him. I mean, did Facebook turn over that information? We've had cases in the past where Yahoo turned over information about a Chinese dissident to the Chinese government. That Chinese dissident is now in prison for 20 years. And so there have been cases over the years of social media companies kind of, I don't want to say turning on their users, because in some ways, if they've got a presence in that country, they're forced to comply with local laws. But at the same time, these companies don't necessarily have our best interests at heart. And I think that whenever we think about social media, we need to remember that these are private companies. They don't owe you anything. This is not the public sphere. It's the shopping mall.
Firsthand. When you put something on Facebook, you can argue all day you had privacy settings, but your expectations of privacy go way down. It's like yelling something. If you have 500 followers, it's like yelling it out to 500 people. So I would not post anything on Facebook or tweet anything you do not want the media, your wife, friends to know. I would really be aware of that. And I used to be a lawyer before I was a comedian, and I'm much happier now. But I remember the cases had to deal with expectations of privacy. That's the way the court would look at it. And I think you have a very low expectation of privacy if you post something on a Facebook wall, and that if the media were to take that, it's going to be at your peril. So watch what you post. Watch what you tweet. It can be used against you in a courtroom, in any kind of divorce proceeding, in a lawsuit between people, just used against you in other cyber wars when people are bad-mouthing each other on blogs.
Oh, I mean, there have been, it's definitely been used in court cases where somebody said that they were injured, but then, there's photos of them skiing. But then you've also got cases where debtors, credited, coming after people on Facebook, they couldn't track them down, right? You're trying to evade the creditors, and then, they find you because they found your Facebook account, and they know what city you live in, then they can, so I think there's one issue in authoritarian countries, but then there's the other issue here where I think we're at risk too. People get fired every day for things that they tweet.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that when you post something on the internet, it's a lot easier to post than it is to take it down.
It lives forever. It
lives forever. When I was an undergrad, actually, I received a very nasty hate mail from somebody. And so what did I do? I posted it online. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I got a call from a company saying, we're interested in hiring so-and-so. Is it true that he sent you this letter that's posted on the internet? And I said, yeah, it's true. So remember, what goes up doesn't come down when it comes to the internet age. I wanted to give my panelists a chance to make a final thought before opening it up for questions. Not that you have to have a final thought, but if you have a final thought, please share it.
I'm on Twitter at Dean of Comedy. You can follow me there. I'm on Facebook. I think it's a great tool for all. Honestly, I think it's a great tool to keep in touch with people using social media professionally, personally, and just use it intelligently. Think about whatever you're going to write, whatever you're going to post. It can come back to haunt you, clearly. It can also help your career a lot, and it can be a great tool to bring ADC into reaching out to young people. The new generation that's going to come up. It's a great, very effective tool to be used that way effectively. Yeah. So, and I hope it is used by ADC in the future.
I did want to add that the level of kind of knowledge or ability that you have to get involved is becoming lower and lower. In other words, it's easier to get involved in generating your own media, to set up your own blog through Blogger or WordPress or now Tumblr. It's very, very easy. If you're intimidated by this kind of technology, don't be. Just jump in and you'll pick it up very quickly. I just wanted to add. But Jillian, did you have a final thought?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my final thought, because you stole mine. Just kidding. I guess my final thought would be, well, follow me on Twitter, Jillian C. York. But then also, I mean, I think that one of the things that people need to be aware of is safety and security online, right? So we've got all of these great thoughts about how to use social media and these great thoughts about how not to use social media. But then, I mean, for those of us in the US who might need to keep a certain level of security, but then also for those of us who travel outside the US. I mean, I'm sure in this room there are a lot of travelers, and so I would say, whenever you're traveling, be extra cautious, learn how to use, learn how to use certain tools. If you need any help, my organization, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, has a lot of information on how to stay safe while using social media.
Yeah. And so we're going to open it up for question and answers, but I'm also going to pose a question to you, which is, as ADC members and ADC convention goers, do you have recommendations for ADC on how to use social media better? So if you don't have to have an answer to my question, but certainly if you don't have a question for us, you can chime in at this time, or you can throw it on Twitter. We hope you enjoyed the panel. What's that?
I said, why? We can't read it.
Yeah. Is the microphone on?
There we go.
There we go.
Nope, now it's on.
I guess everyone should just line up there.
It's
It
on.
makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, it's ready to go.
All right. I wanted to see if ADC has a staffer who could use the social media to raise money for the staff, retirement benefits maybe, and for their employee benefits, and to build an endowment for ADC.
Yeah, yeah. I also want to point out that as the Obama campaign showed, there are so many fundraising opportunities through using web and online.
Yeah, and there are also organizations, I can't think of the name of one right now, but there are organizations that actually work with nonprofits to help them fundraise. There's one that actually, it picks a charity per day, and it says give a buck, which I think is really cute. So it says give a buck to whatever, and they use the hashtag give a buck, and this organization helps promote a different nonprofit every day, and I think there's a lot of amazing tools out there.
Yeah, I think if ADC is not using it, that they should be using it. It's very effective. It's easy to do. I imagine they are. I don't work for ADC, but I imagine they are in some of them, but I guess it could always be more effective.
My name is Nadia Saad, and I was born in Damascus. I'm Lebanese. I lived in Egypt all my life. And this name is causing a lot of problems for me. But somebody, Saad could be Muslim, Christian, or Jewish. Or somebody thought I was a Jew. And every morning I get on my email 4, 5 things. And it's really making me sick. They are so wonderfully organized. They are so clever in using this media. So I really would advise you to look at what they're doing, because it's wonderful.
Yes.
They get the mot d'ordre, how do you say mot d'ordre? Every time, for all the students in every university of what they should do. They give them subjects to discuss. They are absolutely well organized, and I just can't avoid looking at that. Now that I'm out of the closet, I hope they're not going to stop sending me this. But every morning, I really rush to this because they also have recipes, and I realize that all our food has its origin in the Bible, and it is a whole, it's fantastic. So I advise you to go there and really look how they're...
Yeah, and what's great now is that anything you don't know how to do, you can Google it. There's templates for everything. You wanna do a newsletter online, you can Google how to do a newsletter online.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about organized, centrally, consciously, systematically.
Yes.
Organizing our action and answering, listen to what they say, a little reacting to this.
Yeah.
I feel so frustrated. I wanted to tell you to do that.
We'll pass that message. The organizations have to do that.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Hi guys, I'm Neda Larry and I'm from the DC area. I have kind of two questions. The first is, if let's say you were working for ADC or if you were working for Anthony Weiner's staff, and you could go back to a split second right after that information was released or that tweet was sent out, what would you do differently to kind of do PR damage control? Because that seems to be a major issue with a lot of organizations and individuals with social media because it's so widespread and so quick. The second question is, what do you see as the future of social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter? MySpace and Friendster have kind of come and gone, but things have replaced that. But how do you see organizations and individuals kind of interacting, and how does that change the realm of the communication that people are having right now?
I would say to the first question, my answer is honesty. I think that whenever a scandal breaks, whenever something like that happens, people are going to talk about it on Twitter. You can't get around that. And I think that you actually have to follow what people are saying and engage with them and answer them honestly. I think really that's the only way to get around something like that. Because if the first response is, if not even necessarily untrue, if it's no comment, you're setting yourself up for disaster.
Yes, just yesterday there was not a scandal that you mentioned, but a minor controversy with Tracy Morgan, the comedian, did a comedy show, made some horribly anti-gay statements. By the next morning, there was a little backlash. He immediately did this full apology, saying I was wrong, I should have never said that, what I said wasn't funny in any context, any situation, which actually diffused the situation a lot more if he had defended himself. So it is about being honest, about being forthright and coming out immediately, trying to change the narrative where you try to control the narrative the best you can by getting out your facts. You're going to say no comment, or you're going to, like in Anthony Weiner's case, make up these allegations about a hacker. The more you lie, obviously, the worse it's going to get. At some point, they're going to catch you. So honesty, being forthright, and responding quickly and immediately with really clear answers that people believe that are credible, I think are the best ways of dealing with it. What was the second question?
Second question, sorry.
Oh, the
future of social media.
Oh.
I don't know.
I think Twitter and Twitter-type tools, and there's a reason. One, I think, Facebook, MySpace, Friendster, those are all kind of like these closed platforms where you've got one-to-one friendships, you've got this, they're very complicated. I think Twitter and the tools that are coming out like it are going to be more effective in the long run because they really generate conversation and they really allow anyone to interact. I can't tell you how many times I've tweeted to a celebrity and had them tweet back, and I'm not that important, so I'm thinking, wow, this is really cool. So I think that any tool that allows you to have, it breaks down all these barriers.
I'm jealous because Kim Kardashian always ignores me.
When I say celebrity, I'm talking like...
Oh, real celebrity?
Oh, okay.
Dean doesn't even follow me on Twitter.
Embarrassing.
I don't know why.
Awkward.
I will.
Okay.
It's not personal. If you follow me on Twitter, I'll follow you back. I'm really a very
Unless
simple
you're
guy.
Yeah.
It's my promise. It's my solemn pledge to everyone.
It is okay if we go to the next question. But thank you for the excellent questions.
Throw us out.
ADC apparently just said that the song that's in controversy is going to be the opening song tonight at the gala.
Did they release a statement?
Yeah, they just did.
So ADC just released a statement that they'll play Malik Jandali's song tonight at the banquet. Thank you for sharing that.
My name is Cassandra Cluse. I'm from the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs. And I'm just wondering, you said you followed the Egyptian Revolution on Twitter. And what kinds of differences in information did you see between what the people posted on Twitter versus what the mainstream media reported?
So, you know, the thing is, with Egypt, I will honestly say, and I've heard this from Egyptian friends as well, that I don't think there was a whole lot of bad reporting. Once the reporters were on the ground, the reporting was fairly accurate. The difference, but I think there's a difference between accuracy and comprehensiveness. So they were accurate, but they didn't necessarily have the local context. Not everyone, I mean, you're sending reporters who don't speak Arabic, who don't necessarily know, the history of Egyptian politics. And so I think, you know, there's a lot of reporting saying, okay, you know, there's this great movement happening on Facebook and Twitter, and it's very important. But what the Egyptians were saying was, yes, but we've been doing this for 10 years, and we have a background in this, and we've had a strong anti-torture movement online for 10 years. And so you've kind of got this, okay, the traditional media gives the overview, and then Twitter is giving you the details and I want to say the flavor. It really is. It's the local flavor. It's understanding what people really think and really believe in the context of what's being reported. And so, you know, I mean, I had the TV on in the background while I was tweeting, but yeah, I mean, I think you really, in many cases, you can follow something like that on Twitter.
Also, I mean, is Al Jazeera English mainstream media? You know what I mean, in terms of this question? I mean, they had a clear advantage in reporting first and better, I think, in Egypt, definitely.
I think from Twitter you got the real facts of things. But just back to the idea of just the video, this is a controversy that could have been ended 3 days ago or 4 days ago when it started. Playing the video now has already burned the bridges with certain people in our community. Not allowing the singer to perform. Playing the video is not going to make those people who didn't come to this event, I think, turn around and go, oh, I'm going to come to the events in the future now. It's going to take more than that from ADC. And I think things are going to change. I mean, it's a great step. It's a great positive step, and I applaud it for what it is. But it's going to take more than that. It's going to take more of a philosophical change. The Arab Spring, as I said, it's not limited to the Arab world. It's here as well. You know, we want democracy. We want input. We want organizations that we feel that we can engage and be a part of. And it did change it. People talked about it here, and it did cause a change. So that's a really positive thing. And hopefully there'll be more positive changes, and it'll bring in the other people who have lost some faith and other new ones who are like, look, I want to be a part of ADC. It's an organization I could be proud to be part of. And I know it can be. There's no doubt. It is, and it's going to be hopefully better in the future with some changes.
Well, and I would just, yes. I would just add to that and say, you know, I mean, 10 years ago, had this happened, you wouldn't have the same kind of controversy that you're having right now. The reason this is happening is because people are talking online. I firmly believe that. 10 years ago, a 24-hour turnaround would have been fine to fix a situation. It's not anymore. This is the era of truth.
You would have got a letter in 2 days about it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the questions. Next.
Good afternoon. My name is Meher Qayyum. I'm PETA Policy, as in pita bread, on Twitter.
Hi.
Awesome.
I just had a question. Maybe it's a little too nerdy, but you guys would probably know best. The question is, we see with grassroots organizations, Twitter and social media help elevate a message that's very, you know, abstract and can get clear points across. But the thing is, as you become elevated in more of a formalized organization, maybe even a corporation, they want to have their cake and eat it too, where they post things, they hire an intern or someone that is very energetic and unique and will post things, but then there's like, I mean, the attorneys here will appreciate that. There's always this sidebar that says, any retweet is not an endorsement, anything we say is not part of this thing. So to what extent, in your observations in the era of truthiness, does this have this, you know, pendulum between grassroots and saying what you want to say as an activist, because those are the people that really own that type of media, to the private sector and the large companies like Facebook that will sell you out if they feel like they need to because they're not endorsing what you're saying.
Right.
How much is this cake and eating it too, and will this change?
Well, you know, I mean, I think that, I hope that I'm answering this right, because I think that was a complex question, but I mean, I think that, you know, I'm one of those people that has the retweets are not endorsements, and, you know, I don't tweet for my organization, I tweet for myself, and so I tweet about a lot of issues that are important to me, but don't necessarily have anything to do with my professional work. But, you know, there are a lot of corporations that kind of get it right. Like, if you look, I mean, I think some really good examples are Zipcar, Zipcar, right? Yes, I know Zipcar, okay. I think they do it right. I think they are really good at tweeting. I think JetBlue is another one, Zappos, the company that sells shoes. Those are companies that actually really interact with their people. And then you've got the Comcast bots, where if you tweet the word Comcast, 20 people come and say, how can I help you? I work for Comcast. You're like, oh God, please. Like, you've got to put like a little asterisk instead of the O, just to make sure that Comcast doesn't, you know, we're like leeches, but Sorry. But yeah, so I mean, I think you're right. I mean, they want to have their cake and eat it too. And I think that, these companies do need to be able to strike a balance. And I think, I mean, from my personal, and this is really my personal take on the situation, I think that Twitter as a company does a really good job in engaging with its users, in being real, in putting forth this philosophy that I think Twitter genuinely does believe in free expression. Look at what they did with WikiLeaks. They stood up to the subpoena. I mean, in the end, they had to hand over a couple of names, but Twitter was subpoenaed by the Department of Justice to hand over the information of two people who were involved in WikiLeaks, one of whom is a U.S. citizen, the other of whom is an Icelandic citizen. And in the end, they had to do it, but they resisted it. And so I think really looking at these companies' ethos and making smart decisions about how to use them, it's important.
And I just tell people I'm a comedian, so don't take it seriously, right? If I tweet something, go, what did you tweet? I'm like, I'm a comedian, so I use that defense as much as possible. I think my time's running low on that defense, though.
Nah, you can get away with it.
Yeah.
Thank you for the panel. It was very interesting. My name is Nizar Farsakh. I'm Palestinian. I work on leadership and community organizing at Harvard. And my question to you, you touched upon these points. I want you to elaborate a bit more and give us a more in-depth analysis of it, which is when you spoke about the role of social media, one of the main concerns or challenges in community organizing is actually commitment. So you may have 20,000 people who voted for something on Facebook. That doesn't mean you have 20,000 people that are going to be on Tahrir Square. So where's the role of social media in actually doing that action, which you alluded to, Jillian? If you could speak more about that.
Sure. So you're talking about slacktivism.
Okay, whatever it is. The second part to that is, again, also the fact that, yes, it is very horizontal, but at the same time, you don't have structure. Also, you don't have hierarchy. So in a sense, there is maybe no accountability. There are no rules. So how do you account for being effective in community organizing or in social action using social media when there are actually no rules? People can say whatever they want, and people, as you said with that Syrian blogger, people did not know who she was, and ultimately there was that was a challenge. And finally, on relating to ADC, to what extent do you feel, or how would you answer those who say the same way that you have no taxation without representation, well, no representation without taxation? To what extent can you make the broad base of ADC one where your commitment to ADC shows in representation in ADC and in how it runs its programs? Thank you.
Very good questions.
I can answer the first one. I mean, I think there's an argument that there's a lot of activism online that's really just slacktivism. So sitting on your couch and like armchair politics, basically. And to that I say, I think there is a lot of that. I mean, when you look at people signing petitions for Sudan, that's a really good example. A lot of the activism in the U.S. around Sudan has been click, 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 no real action. Not that there necessarily is any real action that one could take in that situation, but so I think that when you look at what happened in Egypt, I mean, you had strong online organizing. Egypt had a strong background, the labor unions, et cetera, et cetera. So you had all of this happening, and then you had these connections to the young people who are using social media. I think Egypt is a specific case, and I don't think that you can necessarily replicate that without that background in activism. But one other thing to that point is, Malcolm Gladwell wrote this article last year saying that, you can't have strong ties online. Their weak ties happen online, strong ties happen online. I completely disagree with that. Some of the strongest ties that I have in my activism are with people that I have never met, or people who I have met after meeting them online first. So I think that the key is that you can't assume that because you tweet to somebody once that you've got a tie there, but you can still develop those ties online, and that's what we're seeing. I mean, you do see a lot of back channel, when I say back channel, I mean like through groups and through email lists. There's a lot of back channel conversation that happens in the background, and I don't think we can discount that. I don't remember the second question, but I know the third one.
I did want to add to the first question. I think, like, in Egypt, for example, if the debate on the We Are All Khalid Saeed page just stayed there without Tahrir, you wouldn't have had a revolution.
Right.
So it's that gap between how do you get from We Are All Khalid Saeed page to Tahrir Square. And it really comes down to there still has to be feet hitting the pavement, there still has to be the face-to-face, there still has to be developing offline relations. That's why I think the point is that it's a tool, not the end game. It's not the end game. It's not the end game. Setting up a Facebook page is not a victory. I know we're really low on time, so I think we should talk personally about the other two questions. Dean, is it okay if we skip to the next, or did you want to say something about that?
I think what you pose is a classic question that organizations have all the time. When you have all these people on numbers on paper, how do you get them active to come to conventions? when I was active in political parties, the same question all the time. What motivates them? How do you reach out to them? There's really no set answer. You have to find something that makes them passionate enough to come out. And in Egypt, it was clear. It was freedom. It would motivate them. Younger people today, it's the same thing I heard 20 years ago when I was younger. You guys don't want to do anything. It's about somehow making this issue important enough that they're going to give up time from their lives, from their days, from their family, from their work to come out and give some extra time for something else. Yeah. How do you do that? It's a mystery almost, but you've got to keep doing it. One fan page won't do it. One Facebook or one tweet won't do it. It's an ongoing building systematic relationship with people.
Yeah. So this is the last question, and then we'll for you all.
And we'll try to chat with you after.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry for that. First, I have actually a joke for you, Dean, to use from here. Yeah, if you open the page of this here to page 4849, you're gonna find on one side a letter from the Syrian ambassador. On the other side is a letter from the Bahrain ambassador. Both of them are congratulating ADC for the efforts in civil rights. And it's like, does that really help you?
The kiss of death letters, yeah.
Okay. So, you don't have to quote me. You can use it without saying that.
I'm stealing that.
So the other thing is that we're having a demonstration today next to the White House for supporting the Syrian people at 2 p.m. So whoever is available, please help us. The reason I'm saying that right now because the page was taken down, and how do we protect ourselves?
Wait, what page was taken down?
The event page for having this demonstration.
Really? On Facebook?
Down.
Facebook took it down?
Yes, yeah.
Maybe Jillian
mysteriously. So what happened? What kind of advice do you have for us?
Yes, this is actually key, and I'm going to say this because I will personally, I promise you that I will personally send an email to someone at Facebook about that. What happens on Facebook is that basically if you have any enemies, which I'm sure anybody talking about political issues does, they will report you. And so they can click report this person and have this page taken down. And the problem is that oftentimes, Facebook is a huge platform, so we got to give them a little bit of credit. 600 million people, obviously they can't get to every case right away. But the problem is that when you report someone, it seems to trigger a takedown, and then it's got to go through this human review process. And then they say, okay, well this is, and if there's anything in Arabic, maybe they can't read it. So you've got all these problems around being able to get a page back up. And so I find that really unfortunate. And what I say to that is, if your page gets taken down, put 20 more up in its place. That's really the only answer. And I don't know how else to get that through Facebook's heads. It's very frustrating and it's not fair. And this actually happened in Egypt with the We Are Al Khalid Said page. It was taken down because Wael Ghonim, as we know now, was using a pseudonym. Facebook took the page down because you're not allowed to use a fake name on Facebook. And as a result, they actually had to call someone in. I don't want to use names, but it was somebody in DC who stepped in his place and took over the account so that it could remain up and remain online. And so this is a real problem. And I mean, to activists, I often say don't use Facebook. And I don't know if that's really the right thing to say because it's where the network is. So it's a tough balance.
It is a tough balance. So our last and final
thought.
Talk
to me after.
Yes, remember the 4 points. It's a tool. Social media is a tool that can be used for organizing, for broadcasting, but it does have its downsides, so learn how to use it right and to use it powerfully. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.